The United States is headed for a total collapse. And it's not going to be just financial collapse. Financial collapse is a huge part of the equation, obviously, but there's much more to this picture. A nation that is socially unified and politically sound can quickly recover from a currency crisis, stock market collapse, or even the loss of a war. But when a nation is fractured ideologically, corruption at every level of government and finance, and with a culture that has become hedonistic, superficial, and self-absorbed, the chances of that nation holding together through a serious shock are very slim. In this video, we're not going to attempt to outline every possible scenario and every possible outcome. And we're not going to go into the technical details of why we're in this situation, nor am I going to try to prove the point that we are headed for a collapse. I've made a number of videos covering these topics that you should watch if you need the background. Here we're just going to focus on what comes after the collapse, however that collapse unfolds. So imagine, if you will, that we're fast forwarding to that moment in time when the US government has lost control. The banking system and the dollar have collapsed, and the people are left to choose what comes next. The specifics of how we got to this moment are blurred, and the details of the aftermath are left to the imagination. So, what will you choose? How will you rebuild? In our previous video, I put forth a challenge to tell us how you would replace the current system if you managed to topple the US government. I asked this question to illustrate a point, which is that even among those who want to see this current regime removed from power, there's no consensus as to what should come next. That's a problem, and it's a very serious problem because it means that the fall of the US government could mark the beginning of a bloody and protracted civil war as multiple factions battle for control. Now, just to give you an idea of what some of these factions could look like, let's take a look at some of the comments from that video. The idea of setting up a socialist system is very popular. This came in multiple varieties, ranging from anarcho-socialist to the socialist republic. There was also quite a few people who wanted to institute a resource-based economy. Some people thought that the answer was to put Ron Paul in charge. To be honest, I'm not convinced that Ron Paul would actually want that job. We have a few anarchists and voluntarists who want to have a society where people aren't ruled over by government at all. We had some that said that the system is fine as it is and doesn't need to be changed. And we had quite a few who proposed that we revert back to the Constitution or restore the Constitution, though it's a little bit unclear as to what that would entail. Some people came right out and said that they would prefer to revert things back to the way they were in the 1700s, which, though unrealistic, is actually the clearest of the reversion proposals, because at least then we know what we're reverting back to. Many others say restore the Constitution, but restore to what? The very first version, where blacks were only considered 3/5 of a human and only land-owning white males could vote? Or do we move it a little farther forward to make these concessions but stop before we get to the 16th Amendment, which sets up the federal income tax? I'm not trying to answer this for you, I'm just saying that you have to be clear about what you're talking about. Now, without me taking sides on any of these issues, just take a look at these factions. Many of them are diametrically opposed and cannot be brought together in a compromise. So what would happen if these people were left to sort out what comes next while operating from our current paradigm? A paradigm in which the state uses violence to enforce its will. There's really only three possibilities. One, you all open a debate and try to convince each other which way is the right way. Good luck with that. You've had the internet for almost 20 years now and you still haven't sorted that out. I highly doubt that the conservatives are going to convert the liberals or vice versa in a post-collapse scenario, and you may not even have the benefit of the internet. Option number two, you settle this issue with violence, and whoever has the most guns and ammo and is the best organized crushes all the opposition. This is how these situations are traditionally handled, and it's the most probable outcome if we don't work to change the paradigm we're operating from. Or option number three, we take an alternate path where people group together according to the way that they want to live and they allow others to do the same. It should be obvious that option number three is the only sane and moral option. Trying to convince everyone that your way is the right way isn't going to work, and using violence to crush everyone that disagrees won't give us a world worth handing down to future generations. Now, the third option is actually the most practical option for other reasons as well. When the US government collapses, people are going to have to band together in their local communities to survive. Those that succeed are not going to be Mad Max loners roving the wilderness, but rather cohesive groups that are capable of living and working together. These groups are going to be small, and there will likely be numerous groups living in areas that were once single cities. It only makes sense that these groups are going to bring people together who are close enough to the same frequency to work towards a common goal. The most basic goal being survival. It is highly unlikely that these groups are going to immediately be capable of merging together to reconstitute something resembling the United States. This is something that may be hard for some people to come to terms with. Once the United States collapses, it's not coming back. What we're looking at is something akin to the collapse of the Roman Empire, which crumbled into many pieces, which then began to develop their own cultures and languages over time. What did the Roman Empire become? It became Spain, France, Italy. Even Germany and England were once part of the Roman Empire. Now, you can make the argument that the European Union is currently regrouping the Roman Empire. However, it should be obvious that the Roman Empire never came back in the form that it had before. Now, here's where the non-aggression principle comes in. There is no way that we're all going to come to an agreement as to how we want to live. But that's okay. as long as we can agree to at least not use violence to impose our way of life onto others. There's absolutely no reason that one community couldn't build a resource-based economy right next to an anarcho-capitalist community, or have an anarcho-socialist community right next to a constitutional community. As long as we don't initiate violence to get our way, there's no reason that these contradictory systems couldn't coexist. The non-aggression principle is really a very, very simple idea. And that's a good thing, because the simpler an idea is, the better chance it has of being adapted by people with very different ideologies. Could a constitutionalist abide by the non-aggression principle? Of course they could. Could an anarcho-socialist abide by the non-aggression principle? Again, of course you could. Now, on the other hand, if you come from an ideology that does insist that you have the right to initiate violence against non-violent people to get them to do what you want, then yes, we have a problem. And that's why I keep bringing it back to this concept. The non-aggression principle is the only way that communities of humans can live together without becoming totalitarian. Now, if the non-aggression principle is agreed upon between the communities, then those communities can grow into federations which exchange resources and provide for common defense. You can think of these like states in our current system, except that member groups would be much smaller, much more autonomous, and there would be no central power like the federal government imposing its will over the group. If you organize like this, then you wouldn't need to come up with a single right way to live. We could each choose how we want to live and let others choose what they want. If the community down the road wants to try out socialism, then great, have at it, as long as they don't try to push it on their neighbors. If you really think about it, this is the only sane way to organize when a population is culturally divided. An additional benefit of this approach is that rather than monoculturing culture, which is what we do right now, you would actually have a choice. You would have real diversity of systems, and we could let these experiments play themselves out and find out what works. And maybe, just maybe, somebody will come up with something that works better than what we have right now. What I'm talking about here is dealing with culture the way we deal with technical inventions. When something works, it's imitated. When something fails, we don't all have to repeat those mistakes. The problem with our current paradigm is we force everybody into the same experiment. So when one experiment fails, the whole system fails. Now, I've tried to come up with a label for this concept. I've considered the term federated voluntarism and voluntary federationism. To be honest, both of them sound a little bit clumsy to me. What are your thoughts? How would you rebuild? My challenge to you is to answer in a video response, but with one condition. You have to answer the question of how you would deal with people who don't want to go down the same path. Would you use violence to force those people to comply? Would you create a system of law enforcement to have others carry out that violence for you? Be honest here. Don't skirt around the question. Bonus points if you can come up with a better name than voluntary federationism or federated voluntarism. If you want more content like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel, StormCloudsGathering on YouTube. For lots of other bonus content, be sure to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/StormCloudsGathering and on Twitter at Collapse Updates. And of course, our website is StormCloudsGathering.com.